Good evening. I'm Martijn Andrea, and today I chair the Planning Committee, which consists of 9 elected borough councillors supported by a range of professional officers. It is the committee's responsibility to determine a planning application using current national and local planning policies and other relevant planning considerations. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who have registered to speak will be invited to address the committee with a strict limit of 3 minutes. Once the presentations have been made, the committee will discuss and debate the application, seeking clarifications from the council's professional planning officers where necessary. We can only focus on the proposal before us and only take into account what are considered material planning considerations. We welcome members from the public to attend these meetings. I would like to point out that members of the public, either supporters or objectors to the application, are not permitted to address the committee outside of the allocated public speaking sections for each item, or to ask questions, interject or clap during the meeting. Planning proposals can often generate strong opinions both for and against the development. But committee business needs to be conducted in a professional and orderly manner without interruption from the public gallery. As chair, if there is a disturbance from the public gallery, in accordance with point 5.25 of the Council's Constitution, I have the discretion to, if needed, take a number of steps, which include removal individuals from the meeting and clear part of the gallery. I would like maybe to propose, maybe for the committee members, maybe to do a swap in the agenda, that we start with the application for Woodley and then secondly to the one on Arborfield. Is everybody okay with that one? Can I just see? Thank you. And did you all get the material from that lot, the photo pack and extra material sent? Okay, thank you. Then any apologies?
Councillor Akhtar, Councillor Margetts, Councillor Yangamvana.
Thank you. And then we go to the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I confirm that everybody is okay with that one and that we can accept that one? Yeah, thank you. Any declaration of interest? Carol?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's for the item for Reading Road, Woodley. I'm on the Town Council Planning Committee and I was part of that debate, so I need to remove myself from the room.
Thank you, Carol. There's no application. Yeah, oh, Mike.
Don't know whether this is a relevant declaration of interest or not, but I receive a pension from a company that does a lot of work for the applicant for Duck Nest Farm.
Okay, I think that is, thanks, at least we noted it. Yeah, but I think that is okay at the moment. Application is to be deferred, there's no withdrawal of the items. So then we go to the first item, which is application 261179, which is in Reading Road and Woodley. And thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to members of the committee and to all those present today. This application relates to 108 Reading Road, Woodley, and seeks a variation to Condition 2 of Planning Permission 251184. The original permission, 251184, approved a single-storey rear extension, replacement roof with dormers to create first-floor accommodation, roof terraces and associated alterations. A subsequent variation under application 252525 approved an enlarged rear dormer and removed the roof terrace. The current application seeks further amendments to the approved scheme. These include revisions to the rear balcony, alterations to the dormer roof form, changes to fenestration and associated material changes. Turning to the site and surroundings, the property occupies a prominent corner plot at the junction of Reading Road and Elmwood Close. The development approved under earlier permissions has largely been implemented, and members will see from the site photographs that a lot of the building works are complete. As I move through the slides, members will note the comparisons between previously approved schemes and the current proposal. Before considering the individual amendments, it is important to note that the principle of the replacement roof, dormers, first floor accommodation and rear balcony has already been established through the extant planning permissions. The key issue for members this evening is therefore not whether those elements should be permitted in principle, but whether the amendments now proposed would result in a materially greater harm than the development that could already lawfully be carried out. In respect of the front elevation, the amendments include revised window arrangements and changes to the appearance of the building. Officers consider that these changes do not materially alter the overall character of the approved development and remain acceptable within the street scene. On the side elevation facing Elmwood Close, the proposal includes the removal of one ground floor window and alterations to the dormer roof form. Whilst the building is clearly larger than the original bungalow, members should note that the principle, scale and massing of the replacement roof and dormers has already been established through the previous permissions. Officers consider that the proposed amendments would not result in material additional harm to the character of the area. Turning to the rear elevation, the principal issue raised by neighbours is the proposed rear balcony. Members will note that a balcony was originally approved under application 251184. The balcony now proposed would be approximately 1.3 metres narrower than the balcony originally approved. The balcony would be enclosed by glazed balustrades with 1.8 metre high privacy screens at either end. These screens extend approximately 0.4 metres beyond the railing at the end of the balcony. Between the balcony and the edge of the roof, low-level planting is proposed. On the northern side elevation, there is a change in fenestration towards the front of the dwelling and alterations to the dormer roof form. Again, members are asked to note that the principle, scale and massing of the replacement roof form and dormers has already been established through previous permissions. The proposed fenestration change at the front is deemed as having no material impact. As shown in the photographs on this slide, the balcony would be partially visible from Elmwood Close and neighbouring properties. Officers have carefully assessed the potential for overlooking and loss of privacy. Given the previously approved fallback position, the reduced width of the balcony and the proposed privacy screening, officers conclude that the impact on neighbouring amenity would not be materially different from that already accepted under the extant permission. With regard to the amended dormer roof, the proposal introduces a slightly wider flat roof section to achieve a shallower roof pitch. However, the dormer remains set down from the main roof and is set in from the side boundaries more than that under the previously approved scheme. Officers are therefore satisfied that the original impact remains acceptable. Members will be aware that objections have been received raising concerns regarding character, overlooking, privacy, noise and parking. Officers have paid particular regards to these matters and they have been fully assessed within the officer report. Officers consider that the proposed amendments would not result in unacceptable harm to neighbouring amenity. They would not appear materially more intrusive than the approved schemes. Additionally, adequate parking provision would be retained within the site. In conclusion, officers have assessed the proposal having regard to the extant permissions and the fallback positions they create. The amendments now proposed, including the balcony and revised dormer, are not considered to result in materially greater harm than the development already approved. Officers are therefore satisfied that the proposal would not result in unacceptable harm to the character of the area or the amenities of neighbouring occupiers. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ron. And now the first speaker will be Chair. Online. Or can I go to the next one? Then will be Mrs. Lewis. Could I ask you? Mrs. Lewis is representing the residents. Yep. You have 3 minutes.
I live at number 2 Elmwood Close, which is in parallel next to 108 Reading Road. The boundary of our property extends beyond the plan produced in this application booklet. This is my land registry plan showing the actual boundary and the impacted area is highlighted. We disagree with the planning officer that it would not have an unacceptable impact and believe it is detrimental as per policy CP3. We stand by our comments preceding the planning officer's report. The planning officer refers to section 73, but the proposal is not limited to a simple amendment of approved drawings, the householder has installed windows and doors which do not match any of the approved plans and seeks to reintroduce the roof terrace by combining the earlier permissions with this application. The first application, we believe, should have gone to committee, 251184. The removal of the roof terrace was a deliberate feature of the second permission granted by the council, 252525, when the householder sought bigger living accommodation. The householder said it would reduce the impact on neighbours and enhance privacy. On that basis, we and other Elmwood Close neighbours didn't object to the enlarged living accommodation, and the council accepted the householder's comments about privacy when it granted that permission. Reintroducing the roof terrace changes the amenity impact of the development, which is now bigger than it should have been. The planning officer says at paragraph 9 that there are no other examples of dwellings with balconies in the immediate street scene. This is more than a balcony, it's a roof terrace, and he's right, there are no others. It's out of keeping with the environment. We have concerns about our privacy and our loss of amenity by this application and our ability to enjoy our own home and garden. Noise, paragraph 22, the planning officer refers to noise, but he has not offered any evidence that noise from the roof terrace will not affect our ability to enjoy our garden. He has not confirmed that the acoustic rating of the privacy screens will prevent noise coming into our garden. We do not accept that the noise on the roof terrace 3 to 4 metres in the air is the same as noise you would get from a garden. In fact, experience shows us that the noise heard from the builders and people on the roof terrace is intrusive and far in excess of a normal garden noise. We are happy to allow you to put a microphone in our garden so that you can do the required acoustics tests for you to provide the evidence that it will not affect us. Privacy screens mitigate overlooking, but they do not eliminate it. And obviously they have gaps, so privacy is not complete. Dennis, sitting over there, who is from number 1 Elmwood Close, will be overlooked. Screens facing him are only 1 metre high. He is also very concerned about the impact of noise coming down from a higher level into the gardens. Okay, so simply we need some privacy and enjoyment of our private garden spaces. Another neighbour did raise the point that people on the terrace might be a distraction when cars are driving in and out of the close, which we think is a fair point too. Thank you.
Then Alison, could I? As the ward member.
Chairman, members of the committee, I want to focus on one specific aspect of this application, the proposed installation of a roof terrace and the impact it would have on neighbouring residents. The key issue here is the change in level. Because the terrace is elevated, it introduces a very different relationship between properties compared to what currently exists. It would allow direct and far-reaching views into neighbouring homes and, importantly, into private rear gardens. For many residents, gardens are their main private outdoor space. At the moment, they may have a reasonable degree of privacy, but the introduction of a raised terrace would fundamentally change that. People would be overlooked from above in a way that simply doesn't happen now, and the loss of privacy would feel intrusive to their day-to-day life. Alongside that, there is the issue of noise and general activity. Roof terraces do tend to be used mostly in the evenings and during warmer weather, exactly the same time that the neighbours want to relax in their own gardens. And even normal use has the potential to carry more noise because of the elevated position. So this isn't just a minor change, it's a shift in how the space would be experienced by surrounding residents. Taken together, the overlooking, the loss of privacy, increased activity would be a clear and harmful impact on neighbouring amenity. In my view, that harm goes beyond what should reasonably be expected in a quiet residential close. I also think it's something that isn't easily addressed in conditions. The design of the roof balcony, the terrace, is inherent to it. Its height, its openness, and it's difficult to see how screening, looking forward, could possibly resolve the loss of privacy all the sense for the neighbours of being overlooked. And for those reasons, I think this element of the proposal is unacceptable, and I would urge the committee to refuse the application on the grounds of harm to residential amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. The only one we're not having is Mr. Lewis from Woodley Town Council, who is going to be online, but he's unfortunately not available. So that means that we can start the debate straight away. Who wants to go first?
Right. Okay. So can we go back, Marcus, to the? Oh, is it? Oh, what's your name? Sorry, Rowan. Oh, Rowan. You're on the screen as well. Can you go back to the where you've got the approved pending? I'm interested in the one with the terrace stroke balcony. Yeah, so pending. So we've the approved one is, just talk me through that approved versus the pending. So the approved has a bigger floor space. The approved one has a metre high screen.
You may be able to see that the privacy screens also project forward of the railing at the end of the balcony. It was a little bit more previously on the current submission to the north of projection forward of the railing.
And the two residents, well, one resident spoke, the other residents that was referred to. If you look at Elmwood Close, so one lives parallel. So if we look at Elmwood Close, yeah, you've got it there. Yeah. So the parallel one, so if we're going in Elmwood Close, we've got, that's it? Sorry, go to the right. Yeah, so that's the one the lady spoke about. And then the other gentleman lives at the back. Okay. Right.
So there's a 30-metre or 28-metre separation from the rear of the approved single-storey extension to the back of the garden. So the Borough Design Guide requires a back-to-back of 22 metres. So we are well in excess of the standard within our Borough Design Guide. And then in terms of this property here, officer's view is that where the privacy screens extend beyond the balcony, if you can see where the end of the property is, you would have to lean significantly over the railing to have any view towards I believe that's number 2.
And that's a garage there, is that, I presume?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. I mean, I'm trying to work out. We've got something that's been approved. We've got a pending. The fallback position is the approved. Yeah.
But
Okay.
and the balcony seems to be bigger than the approved one. Am I right on the fallback position?
So for a little bit of clarity, my understanding is that it's now 1.3 metres narrower in total. Where the dormer was extended under the original variation 252525, that extended the dormer further out. So as you can see here, the dormer now finishes further. However, so I believe it was a 0.8 metre further back, the balcony now finishes on the property, but officer's view is that with the privacy screens, with the fallback position, what is the material harm between the two? We don't believe there is any significant material harm that would warrant refusal of the application. I think what we're assessing today is, with that fallback position, it's a consideration that officers have to have, hence our recommendation.
Mike?
So considering that drawing, there isn't a dimension on the pending from the screen to the edge of the roof. But I'm guessing, I think you said it's only 400 millimetres?
Was that where, how far the privacy screen projects beyond the railing?
Yeah.
Yes, that's 0.4 metres.
And the previous screen, because the balcony was set somewhat further back,
I don't have the measurement, but
well, it says here 1200 millimetres from the edge of the roof.
that would be, so that would have been triple.
So if you drew a line from somebody standing adjacent to the screen, how far could they look that way? The new balcony is substantially, gives them a wider angle of view than the original one. Quite substantially. You can do it by just sticking a line on the PowerPoint, which I've just done. So they are going to have a much wider view of the adjacent garden.
Which garden do you refer to?
The one on the left.
So I don't have photos here to show it, but you can actually, if you can see on this plan, this here is an existing garage
Yep.
in the applicant's garden. Yeah, maybe I could switch, hold on.
I mean, it doesn't matter, either side of the
Yes,
the proposed balcony, you've got a much wider field of view of
So-
the privacy screens than you had with the one that is approved.
yes, that
And
is,
I
that
would
is true.
guess the different angle is probably 25, 30 degrees. That's substantially wider view.
So
So
the
it gives them
view
much
would be
more
that
opportunity to look further.
where the main private amenity spaces of dwellings, I mean, if you've ever been in, you know, a loft conversion, you've looked out of a window,
Yeah.
you have somewhat of view over a residential garden. That's a common feature of residential properties, especially given smaller kind of separation distances rear to rear. Our view in this instance is that the main private amenity space would not be overlooked. As we discussed, this extant permission, it's somewhat a fallback position. If they were to implement it, there would also from that balcony be views over neighbouring gardens. However, what we're assessing is the material difference between the two. We do not believe it to be so significant that neighbours would be overlooked considerably worse than the already approved scheme.
Okay, thank you.
And what about noise? Rowan?
I think my only comment on noise would be, imagine a situation with children playing in a garden. What do you have on a balcony? I don't imagine children kicking a football around, partying, screaming. It would be used for sitting, drinking a coffee in the morning, perhaps. I don't have a terrace myself, I can't comment, but I don't imagine the level of noise would be too dissimilar from other activities associated with residential properties. It's staying in use as a single dwelling house for a family use. So my understanding would be no noise impact.
Yeah, could I just also jump in and draw members' attention to the actual dimensions of the balcony? You know, we may focus on the privacy screen and we may focus on how a balcony is used, but its size, its depth, does dictate how usable it is for certain activities. And I would say the one on the left, the approved scheme, is much deeper. It has a greater area. You could feasibly, practically put lots of tables and chairs if you so wished out there. But on the right-hand side, the approved scheme is clearly much narrower. It is a very narrow terrace. And again, how these features of houses are used is up to the occupants. But generally speaking, if the balcony wasn't there and you had rear windows at first floor level, or as we said, roof conversions, you would have a degree of overlooking out of bedroom windows anyway. So again, in sort of totality, the difference, it is not a principle of the balcony that is already granted. This new balcony, you know, is in officers' view not substantially more harmful.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I was just about to ask that very question, because I imagine that you can't, I mean, the more people there are, the more noise you make. So, in fact, if you can get fewer people on the balcony, you're going to have less noise than before. arguably.
I agree. I think that problem here is that one's been approved. The material difference between that one and that one is very, very insignificant. That's the problem one, but that's been approved.
No, and we can only look at one, the fallback option, I think so. Okay. Any further questions, Mike?
I don't think we can do this, but if those privacy screens extended to the edge of the full edge of the terrace rather than ending approximately 400 or 500 mil short of it, that would improve privacy, but I don't think we can impose that as a condition, can we? No. I'll make a further comment if I may. I mean, if it was that bedroom wall that was in the place of the low edge of the barrier, we wouldn't be having privacy screens, so there'd be an even bigger privacy issue. Would we be bothered about it so much? I don't know.
The only other thing I would say, the lady who spoke mentioned that there are aspects of the build that don't comply with the approved. I'm assuming they are part of the pending, but if they're not, can we ensure that there's a follow-up?
My understanding from the site visit is that the current plans represent was there, but we can do thorough checks. Sure, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? If not, then I agree a little bit with the other ones. I think that the fact that the fallback option is already approved, I can hear the comments from the neighbors, but the fallback option is already there. For me, the material impact of the new one is not as significant as it would want. So I'll propose to go with the officer's recommendation for this one. If I have a seconder, then Catherine, okay. Could we have a vote for this? 4? All 4? Thank you. Yeah, no, you got that one. Okay, thank you. Okay, now we move to the second item on the agenda, which is application number 250733, which is the land at Duck's Nest on Eversley Road in Arborfield. Abby, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to land at Duck's Nest, Eversley Road, Arborfield. The applicant has submitted this scheme as a hybrid planning application. It seeks full planning permission across the northern and western parts of the site for the creation of a suitable alternative natural green space, commonly referred to as SANG. Alongside this, outline planning permission is sought on the southern part of the site for up to 135 dwellings. For the residential component, only the principle of development, along with the access arrangements, are to be determined at this stage. Accesses are proposed via a fifth arm to the Eversley Road, Langley Common Road roundabout, and from an existing but upgraded access on Observer Way. All other reserved matters relating to the residential development, namely appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, would be reserved for future consideration through a reserved matters application. Apologies, my PowerPoint is frozen.
Just needs to load on that. Give us a sec. Go back to that little menu. Just click the screen. Bottom left.
So apologies about that. So the site is located on the corner of Observer Way and Eversley Road, extending up to Harts Close in the north. To the east are commercial units and some residential properties. The site equates to approximately 17.7 hectares across 5 fields and is in a low-grade agricultural use. The application site as a whole is located outside of defined settlement limits in the Wokingham countryside, but to the north is the limited settlement of Arborfield Cross, and to the south is the Arborfield Garrison strategic development location and modest development location. Whilst the creation of the SANG would comply with the exceptions for development within the countryside, as outlined in Core Strategy Policy CP11, the proposed residential element would not, and officers therefore acknowledge from the outset that there is conflict with the development plan and the spatial strategy for the borough. Members may recall that a previous proposal for up to 210 dwellings at the site, albeit on a larger piece of land, was withdrawn following concerns regarding harmful coalescence between Arborfield Cross and Garrison settlements. Consequently, there was conflict with one of the overarching aims of the Countryside Policy CP11, which is to protect the separate identity of individual settlements. The current scheme has been amended in response to this. Residential development has been removed from the northern part of the site and replaced with part of the proposed SANG, which would remain undeveloped in perpetuity. Officers considered that the SANG would preserve a meaningful visual and physical gap between the settlements and would prevent coalescence to a suitable degree. The proposed SANG and residential elements of the scheme will now be looked at in turn. Firstly, the proposed SANG. This is a significant component of the overall application. It will provide publicly accessible natural green space containing a 2.3 kilometre circular walking route, landscaping, seating and ponds. For those travelling to the SANG by car, it would be served by an existing access off Observer Way and a designated car park. Public right-of-way Arborfield 17, which travels alongside the site perimeter as indicated in orange on the screen, would have connection points into the SANG, along with a new pedestrian access point connecting the SANG to Harts Close. The SANG would provide mitigation for the development's impact on the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area and would have surplus capacity that could potentially assist future development elsewhere in the borough, the latter which is a significant benefit of the scheme. Due to the SANG not containing built form, it will retain an overall largely similar appearance to the site as it is today, and consequently would not result in adverse harm to the surrounding landscape. On the whole, the SANG is a positive element of the scheme and will make a privately owned land publicly accessible for recreation and leisure, not only for future residents of this scheme, but for the wider community. Turning to the residential development part of the proposal, the provision of up to 135 dwellings, including a policy-compliant 40% on-site affordable housing, would contribute significantly to the housing shortfall the borough is currently experiencing. As members will be aware, the borough is unable to demonstrate a required 5-year housing land supply. Because of this housing shortfall, the tilted balance is engaged, as per paragraph 11D of the NPPF, which states that permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. A priority of new housing at local and national level is to locate dwellings in sustainable locations. As the site is located in the countryside, the site has not been judged by the local highway authority as being an optimum location in this regard. The surrounding roads are also observed to be at nearing capacity, which again places great emphasis on non-motorised transport means being a genuine alternative and attractive option to the car. However, through a package of proposed off-site highway works to include new control crossings, improved walking and cycling connections, bus stop upgrades and contributions, the sustainability of the site will improve and give realistic options for residents to access nearby facilities and amenities within the Arborfield Garrison SDL and district centre. Accordingly, the local highway authority raised no objection to the proposal with regard to site sustainability or on highway safety grounds generally. The proposal will also see housing density at a level that is not inconceivable or harmfully out of keeping with surroundings, but at the same time would maximise the efficiency of the land. As such, officers did not conclude that there is reason to resist the maximum quantum of development proposed based on the indicative master plan. A parameters plan has also been submitted that would control how the development would evolve at reserve matters stage. Despite the benefits of the scheme, it is acknowledged that the proposal will result in some undeniable policy conflict in some respects. Most notably, this is harm to the surrounding landscape. This harm has been attributed significant negative weight in the planning balance, and as such, there is conflict with policy TB21. It will result in the loss of a greenfield site, harm to how the landscape is perceived, particularly from the public right-of-way, and impact on landscape features such as the green route enhancement area. However, officers do conclude that although the development would harm the landscape, the proposed location of the residential development is considered to be the most sensitively selected within the site, given it is on lower, less prominent ground level than the remainder of the site. Ultimately, the landscape harm is a shortcoming of the scheme that is required to be factored into the overall planning balance alongside the benefits. Whilst both full and outline permission are applied for, ultimately the hybrid application is one proposal. As such, the planning balance is to take into account the benefits and harms of both. As already referred to, the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. Therefore, as per paragraph 11D, the tilted balance is engaged. Paragraph 9 of the NPPF outlines that achieving sustainable development means that the planning system has 3 overarching aims: economic objectives, social objectives, and environmental objectives. The benefits and disbenefits of the scheme are therefore considered against these objectives. In terms of the economic objective, there would be modestly weighted economic benefits through the construction and operational phases from job creation and future resident spending in the local economy. In terms of the social objective, the primary social benefit would be the provision of 135 new dwellings and affordable units. This is given significant weight. In terms of the environmental role, the proposer is on track to provide over-provision of the statutory 10% net gain owing to the creation of the SANG. It would also see dwellings built to sustainable standards and in a location where residents would have some genuine choice with regard to alternative sustainable transport modes. Against the benefits of the disbenefits, as mentioned, most notably, the development would result in harm to the landscape and loss of an open greenfield site to a large development and would result in some fragmentation of green infrastructure. The proposal also conflicts with the council's spatial strategy by introducing residential development outside of defined settlement limits, and this harm is afforded moderate negative weight. Therefore, in returning to paragraph 11D, ultimately it is not considered that the adverse impacts of granted permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework. Therefore, the proposal is considered to represent sustainable development as defined by the NPPF. Accordingly, the recommendation is to grant full planning permission for the creation of the SANG and outline planning permission for up to 135 dwellings, subject to the conditions and legal obligations outlined in the recommendation box of the main report. Furthermore, the recommendation is also subject to the applicant joining the council's district licence, and commentary on this is within the main report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie. Could I now invite Mr. Seal to speak on behalf of the residents? You have 3 minutes, Mr. Seal.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Richard Seal. Sorry, can I just check that the photos are going to go up on the... I'll start again. My name is Richard Seal, and I have lived with my family at Duck's Nest Farmhouse for 35 years. I'm very worried that the proposed development will increase the risk of flooding that we have experienced on several occasions. I have provided pictures of 2 separate flood incidents. The most recent was in August 2024. During this flood, several outbuildings were under at least 2 foot of water and significant damage was caused. This was in August and caused by a summer deluge of rain that is becoming more frequent in recent years. You will see from the pictures showing the development site that a wave of water is flowing from the field. Most of the land slopes towards us and is currently taken by a pipe through our property to our duck pond. This pipe cannot cope with the flash floods of this nature, causing floodwater to spill over and through our buildings, as seen in the pictures with the tractor and the yellow van. Once the water gets to the duck pond, the culvert under the road is also not capable of coping, causing floodwater to build up. Any development will naturally increase runoff and contamination. I understand that the council will take further steps to mitigate flood risks. However, I remain unconvinced by the planning statement. The provision of dog ponds will be unlikely to hold back water on this scale. Should this be the case, contaminated floodwater will enter the duck pond, threatening the fish and other wildlife supported by it. The developer states in 14.8 that the site is at very low risk of surface water flooding, with a risk of less than 1 in 1,000 each year. This is clearly questionable. The developer states that the site is in flood zone 1, low risk, but acknowledges that the 3 flow paths are present, which introduce overland flow from hillside locations. In 14.10, they state that the most susceptible parts of the site are absent of residential development, which is welcomed by the drainage officer. They also suggest that the dwellings should have raised finished floor levels to protect against the inevitable shallow ponding, their words. It is accepted that the new development is at risk in flood zone 1, but manageable. We sit in a flood zone 3 area, which is approximately 4 metres lower than the lowest part of their site. In summary, I am not convinced that the suggested solutions will be effective at holding back flash flooding. The pipe through our yard is not capable of carrying the volumes of water currently experienced. I am disappointed that the council drainage officer seems to be happy with the proposal and should be mindful that not every problem has a solution. Little or no consideration of the increased flood risk.
Could I ask you to finish?
Sorry?
Could I ask you to complete? It's 3
I'm
minutes.
completing it. Little or no consideration of the increased flood risk our Grade 2 listed property has been taken into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Could I now invite Mr. Burden? No, sorry, Mr. Burden first. Then Adrian, you're the third one on my list.
Okay.
Adrian, sorry. You have also 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Tim Burden from Turley, and I'm speaking on behalf of David Wilson Homes as agent for this application. The application is recommended for approval by officers. We're grateful for their constructive engagement and for the detailed report before you this evening, which provides a balanced assessment of the key planning matters. I do not intend to repeat the officer report, but I would like to emphasise 3 points which are central to your considerations. Firstly, the proposal will make an important contribution to meeting Wokingham's significant housing need at a time when the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. It will deliver up to 135 much-needed homes, policy-compliant 40% affordable housing. The site is available, deliverable and well located to meet local housing need. Secondly, although most detailed matters are reserved for the residential element of the proposal, the applicant has worked closely with the council's highways officers to agree safe and suitable access for pedestrians, cyclists and vehicles. Enhanced pedestrian crossings adjacent to the site, together with wider off-site improvements, have been agreed. The site is also well placed to support sustainable travel, with access to the excellent Leopard 3 bus service operating between Wokingham and Reading, and to access the range of shops and services in both Arborfield Cross and Arborfield Green by modes other than the private car. Thirdly, this scheme has been designed to reflect the landscape considerations in the area and maintain the separate identities of settlements. The proposal includes a substantial SAN, which helps prevent settlement coalescence and preserves the distinction between Arborfield Cross and Arborfield Garrison. The SAN forms the majority of the area for this proposal and will provide a high-quality area of natural green space, utilising existing hedgerows and providing additional planting, with walking routes for the wider community in an area which is currently not accessible. The SAN is significantly over and above what is required for the residential aspect of this proposal and provides substantial social and environmental benefit. And just briefly to add, following the speaker's previous comments, this site is within flood zone 1 and a full surface water drainage strategy has been agreed with officers. I just wanted to briefly highlight that. So for all these reasons, I would respectfully invite members to endorse the officer recommendation of approval. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Burden. And could I now invite Adrian, as a ward member? You also have 3 minutes, Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, I'm speaking as ward councillor for the area against the application, which I believe has serious shortcomings. The site describes itself as a new neighbourhood for Arborfield Green, but we should be clear that it is not and it will not be, as stated in at least 2 places in the officer's report. It's outside of the SDL boundary and severed from it by a busy 50-mile-an-hour road, which has continuous peak hours traffic. This is one of many applications and developments claiming some sustainability from the SDL. SDL facilities were scaled for 3,500 new dwellings, to which already almost 500 have been added, and the local plan update proposes a further 900. Each application adds incrementally to the sustainability challenge. Each may not change the overall position much in percentage terms, but together they are leading to an unsustainable situation. Some local junctions are already under severe stress. For this development, the closest rail travel and available GP and secondary school capacity are all along the Barkham Road corridor, which already experiences severe congestion, with still 1,500 already approved dwellings to be built, which will be seeking the same access. This application seeks to achieve access through a 5th arm to an already compact and busy Eversley Road roundabout. It removes 1 lane from the busiest approach route to that roundabout and seeks to add a traffic light crossing on 1 exit on an already heavily trafficked road. and these changes are only required to serve this application. There is already a new crossing coming further up the road for existing residents. The traffic modelling in the application considers the impact of additional trips generated by the new dwellings, but does not appear to have modelled the additional queuing from the changes to the Eversley Road corridor, which would be proportionally much more significant. Access from Observer Way, described as both existing and secondary, is actually a gate on a field at the moment that's not used. It's the only access to 50 of the dwellings as well as the Sang. Observer Way is a 50-mile-an-hour road with an existing record of serious collisions, notably at the junction with Swallowfield Road, which has much better provision for turning movements than is proposed in this application. The application claims it's acceptable for vehicles to stop on the 50-mile-an-hour single carriageway to turn right into the site, and it's fanciful to believe that drivers doing that would look for the pedestrians and cyclists coming down the hill on the parallel cycle lane alongside the road. The improvements to local transport proposed in the application are mostly necessary and would be welcome, but they're not a mitigation for unsafe access or for the additional congestion on Eversley Road. The balance of issues at paragraph 13.42 in the officer's report describes to me a situation which is not beneficial overall.
Could you finish as well, Adrian?
I acknowledge the work's gone into the application, the need for more housing, but the tilted balance is not without limits. I believe the adverse impacts on this development significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and I believe the application should be refused.
Thank you, Adrian. Caroline, go ahead.
Thank you. Can I start with a couple of questions? On page 14, you've got the environmental agency do not wish to be consulted. And I just wondered why. Was there a technical reason they couldn't do it? And I also noted in the Barkham and Arborfield comments, they mentioned the Healer report, which I looked up. And it does say, right at the end of the Healer report, overall, concerning this plot of land, the context of the site is considered inappropriate, being inappropriate in terms of established settlement form, pattern and landscape character. And that was the 2024 Healer report. Thank you.
So just in answer to your first question, the Environment Agency are not a statutory consultee for all major development. They will only respond to consultations that align with their consultation criteria. As a belt and braces approach, the LPA did consult them and they returned the consultation explicitly saying they did not want to be consulted. So we did our best to get in touch with them, but it didn't meet their criteria. Instead, they directed officers to discuss the matter with the local lead flood authority and drainage officers. So that's your first point. In relation to your second point about the Healer, you're correct. That was the conclusion in the Healer report. However, as you will see in the main report, 3.13, it shows the area that was included within the Healer, and it is much larger than the site presented to you today. The site extended all the way up to Chamberlain's Farm and across the other side of the A of Observer Way. So those conclusions were made on that greater site area. The assessment that's been made on this smaller site is that within the report. So there are material differences because the site area is not exactly the same.
Could I, before I come on to the principle of development, can we just pick up the point that Mr. Seal had around the drainage and the response from our drainage team, no objection, subject to condition? Do we know what they were proposing in that condition? I'm not interested in the SUDs. I'm interested in, because obviously there is a problem. Were they going to rectify that with land drains and blah, 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 blah?
So this is an outline planning permission. So the layout of the scheme is not fixed in terms of the residential element, and so therefore neither is the drainage scheme. So the condition would require a whole drainage scheme to be provided. And as part of the drainage scheme, greenfield runoff rates will need to be achieved. So it means that the rate of water discharge should be no worse than the existing situation. It will unlikely resolve the existing issues, but the development is not required to resolve existing issues. It should just not make the issue any worse. So through the condition and securing greenfield runoff rates, that should be achieved, and hence no objection.
I thought you might say that, but it does say in the proposal, with all matters reserved other than into the site, blah, 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 drainage measures. So that's why I was saying that it's reserved other than, so I was hoping that you might have some nuggets of what they're going to do to try and fix that problem with the drainage.
So I can talk you through what they've indicatively proposed,
Okay.
but I
Yep.
can't. But it's not necessarily the final scheme because the layout is not yet fixed. Having it referred to in the description, I think, was just establishing that there will be a drainage scheme, not that the drainage scheme proposed now is the final one. I can share my screen and just talk you through, if you would like, though, what the situation is at present. So if you bear with me a second. Sorry, I'm not having a very good day with sharing my screen. Right. So on the screen at the moment is the existing arrangement of how water drains from the site. This is taken from the applicant's flood risk and drainage strategy. So at present, surface water enters the ditches that are around the site and are indicated in blue. They are then connected underground to the pond on the objector's land. And this pond is classified as a public surface water sewer. The water then immediately goes downstream on Eversley Road, as represented by this blue line here. As part of this application, the drainage scheme, as you will, if you look at the indicative layout, shows 3 detention basins on the site. And the idea is that water will drain into those detention basins and would capture surface water, and through the use of hydro brakes would release this water at greenfield runoff rates into the ditches and then into the pond. So at the moment, water is travelling into the ditches and into the pond at an uncontrolled rate. With the use of the basins and the brakes, this will potentially be a betterment, and that it will be discharged a more controlled fashion. The indicative drainage scheme also shows that the 2 ditches alongside the neighbouring site, so you can see where my cursor is, so there and there, are also going to be abandoned. So they're obviously the 2 that are closest to the neighbour's property, so I trust that not using those ditches could also be beneficial, and rather focusing on ditches away from neighbouring properties and routing it to the pond via that way. So as I said, the application can't necessarily resolve pre-existing issues, but it should not exacerbate them. And potentially with the future drainage scheme that will be submitted through the use of detention basins or other greenfield runoff rate control measures, it could potentially benefit the surrounding area.
Councillor.
Oh, go on.
Thank you very much. Two things. First of all, I wonder if we've got a record of the school capacities, the local schools that are mentioned, making this site sustainable. I wonder if we know what the capacity is for that. And the second question is on page 80, which is talking about, no, it isn't, it's 82, which is talking about trees. And it says that the, find a bit here, that the Tree and Landscaping Officer raised objection to the proposal. This was not on the grounds of the development being incompatible with on-site trees. So I just want to question why there was an objection. And on page 83, what the last but one, 1613, what does tree truing mean, please?
So just in relation to your first question about the school capacity, no comments were received from the council's education team, so unfortunately I don't have that information. No issue regarding school capacity was raised to officers, and therefore no mitigation was requested or secured. In relation to your question about trees, there was no objection from the tree officer on tree grounds. There would be minimal tree removal across the whole site, and trees of significant importance, such as A category trees and veteran trees, would be suitably protected.
Sorry, the word truing under 1613, is that a typo or is that a technical word?
Oh, sorry, tree pruning. Pruning, sorry. Yes. Sorry, that is a typo. It's not some, yeah.
I mean, this is really, really difficult, because what Adrian has summed up is this isn't a perfect site for housing. When we went there on Friday and you got to that top walkway, it's a wonderful site, absolutely wonderful. And we're going to lose a lot of that countryside. I bet that the section of what they now want to building is the lower land, and you've got that look down across the valley. But we are in a really difficult position. I don't know if any of you read the last appeal notice that came out. I mean, I read it again today, and it's just horrifying that an inspector can almost single-handedly write off where we are with our LPU in a 2 paragraphs, almost saying, you know, you're not meeting your land supply. You're based on the standard method, and I read it because I was shocked. Yeah, the emerging LPU is being progressed under the transitional arrangements within the framework and aims to provide 751 DPA houses per year. Once the LPU is adopted, the council would have a 5-year land supply. However, the LPU would meet less than 80% of the housing need, and therefore, using the standard mission, therefore it'd be subject to immediate review. In addition, blah, 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 blah. So we're right in, yeah, we are. They're the words. You know, and I mean, is this sustainable? In my view, no. All the points Adrian make about that road, we were there on a very quiet Friday. What's it like the rest of the day? You know, and I'm sure we're gonna come on to highways, because we were quite perplexed on how this thing was going to work. But I don't know where we can go. I mean, we're going to be sat here every time, and I think Arborfield's really been hammered. I'm glad that you can help this gentleman and, well, hopefully help this gentleman, but we need to keep an eye on this flooding situation. It is on the extension of an SDL, so, you know, in real terms, the SDL was the deal. Now Arborfield is getting all these other sites that wasn't part of the deal, and we're putting in some extra highways measures to try and help it, but it won't. And as Adrian said again, that centre, the Arborfield Garrison Centre, wasn't designed for all of these other additions, and there's more to come. But I'm sat here thinking, what can we do? But I'll come on to highways in a minute.
Well, I'll probably come on to highways a bit quicker than that. I think the Sang is fabulous. I love Sangs. We need the houses. But, you know, there's the harm to the landscape, as Wayne has just said. And I have serious misgivings about highways. I just feel that, yes, okay, separation of settlements has, that concept seems to have ended up with a new settlement that I think will be isolated from both Arborfield Cross and Arborfield Green. I don't think people will walk to, they might walk to the co-op if they're desperate. Some of them will drive to the co-op, because I don't think that the way you've got from the northern part, the part nearest to Arborfield Cross, the pedestrian or vulnerable road user access goes all round the, not exactly the houses, but it goes a long way around. And I can see people trying to walk along the verge or even the road to go the other way to the co-op. By the way, I am the councillor for Swallowfield, so I actually drive that way at least once a week and at different times of the day, because I'm a councillor. I come in the evenings, I come in the middle of the day, morning, you name it. And I loathe that roundabout that at the moment only has 4 arms. Putting a 5th arm in it, I think will be, it's totally inadequate as it is. And putting another arm in it will, you're just constantly being cut up there already. And I think that in the mornings, people won't be able to get out of the site because they'll have traffic constantly coming up from Observer Way and wherever people come from down there. But there's lots and lots of traffic, and it's just going to be really difficult getting out of the site, I think. As for the other access, not being able to turn right when you're going home, and where are people going to go and turn round if they can't turn into their housing development from the right? Are they just going to chance it? Do it anyway? I don't know. And that road, Observer Way, is already very dangerous, as Adrian has said. Residents of mine have had near misses at the Swallowfield Junction. And I just think it's a disaster waiting to happen. I think that's probably all I've got to say right now.
So thank you, members. Yeah, it's complicated in terms of what's included in the application. For those who read the what I describe as a tete-a-tete with myself and SLR, who've had differing views, and they've continued to try and address our concerns and close the gap between us. So we've done what we can to do that. There are some things where they have continued to push, and there are some things where, you know, I've not quite died in the ditch, but I've just said that you know, this is a red line, and no, we can't cross it. So in terms of the access of Observer Way, we've said no right turn into that access as a position. Now, if members are minded, we've discussed how the on-site master plan is illustrative. So there are ways of being able to connect through the site in a way that if we were to ban right turns out of the access as part of the same traffic regulation order, that could be acceptable. So you've still got ways in and out of the site. The only reason the applicant appears to have gone that way is for the SANG, or SANG car park, and we've discussed how those changes could occur in the illustrative master plan, and or how they could work with effectively a left in, left out, and how the SANG here is different to or complements other SANG elsewhere. So if you're coming up from the south, you will have passed other SANG areas that people could go to. So you would have to particularly want to go to this SANG rather than alternative ones. And if you did particularly want to go this, if the final reserve matters layout meant that people were coming in from the Eversley Road access and going through the site to come to the SANG car park, that could still be possible. So if that was a direction from members, I suspect that the applicant would be content to combine that in the same traffic regulation order that we've discussed. And I would like to think, sorry, I'm looking at David to see whether he's disagreeing with me, but he's certainly not shaking his head. Whether or not he's nodding his head is another thing. So in principle, I'd like to think that that is something we could agree with the applicants. I share some of the concerns with members, particularly Councillor Betteridge, in terms of the overall picture and the Barkham Road corridor. Like most things in our local plan, which carry some weight and have been debated in examination in public, and the parish has made representations to that local plan process along the same issues, there is work that the council needs to work to advance and resolve those concerns. The current expectation is that the community infrastructure levy should be funding that. What we have taken at this point in time is a view that on the tilted balance, the available SIL that could be available for funding highway or transport improvements may not be enough, and therefore further mitigation or access improvement works, which is what discussed and are included in the application, is the combined package that where they may not be able to address all of the development impacts, they could reduce travel demand from other parts of this area of the borough to start to offset their impact. And there is a complex mosaic of different infrastructure obligations, mainly around connecting parts of the cycle network. If you're familiar with the Public Rights of Way Improvement Plan, mainly joining Route D with Route B, and then onward connections to Route A and Route K. So collectively, there's a network that starts to join up Reading with Wokingham and both with Arborfield Green. So this proposal joins several parts of that part of the network. So hopefully that starts to see that offset. But I appreciate that's complicated. There's multiple applications, decisions that have already been made, decisions to be made, and a bit more work around consulting and explaining that for the general public, and of course yourselves as members, to see how the cohesiveness of this package can address that wider impact. But of course, that's within the gift of you to make that decision on whether or not you believe that the applicants and or ourselves have gone far enough. Trust that that's enough for now, but I'm sure you may have some more detailed questions.
Mike.
Thank you. I've got a lot of concerns about this. Just to talk about the highways elements, I wasn't able to attend the Friday site meeting because I was dealing with another transport and parking nightmare with officers and councillors. But I made the point of going today at 8:30 or between 8:30 and 9:15, just to see what it was like. And it is dicing with death trying to cross any of those roads. I parked in the area that is the current field access, which is talking about the access of Observer Way. Getting out of that, you need a rocket-powered acceleration to not collect a car up your backside. And to not have some sort of physical barrier at that entrance to prevent right turns from Observer Way into the new estate and to prevent right turns out of the new estate would seem to me an accident waiting to happen. I guess the alternative could be to start a 30-mile-an-hour zone at the top of the hill, which would at least slow the traffic down a bit. Also, I share the concerns about the amount of traffic already. Nobody's mentioned Hall Farm, but we have applications somewhere in the system, adding a further 2,800, etc. plus houses. Some of that traffic is going to find its way onto Eversley Road, travelling south in the mornings, travelling north in the evenings. So that's going to even add to the network, which this report says it's already at or near capacity. In addition to which, the report also mentions there's no NHS or limited NHS capacity. I'm a council-appointed governor to the Berkshire Healthcare Foundation Trust, so I know only too well the pressures on primary care in the area, in that particular area. Paragraph 19.6 in the report says there's going to be some money paid to the NHS, but we can't indicate what it is because we don't know the numbers. We do know the numbers, it's 135 houses. We have the housing types listed, so we could understand how much the NHS contribution would be. The last one we looked at, it funded 1/3 of one consulting room. Not quite the same number of houses as I recall. So we really do need that number to understand this. I understand from the report that the Thames Water say that the sewage, they are really concerned about sewage capacity in Arborfield sewage farm. Living downstream of it, I'm only too aware that that particular sewage plant pumped raw sewage into what becomes the River Loddon on a number of occasions last year for a number of hours. I do note that this plot, as previously described, including the part that is now Sangnop buildings and the part that is west, is not either in the expired local plan or in the new one. The Healer makes 3 points, I think. One of them about it's inappropriate in terms of the established settlement form and pattern. It also talks about harm to the landscape characteristics. And it also talks about impact on the physical and perceived separation of settlements. I share Councillor Smith's concern about the latest appeal result, which just seems to ride roughshod. And I note in 3.29, it says the LPU is given limited weight despite its advanced stage of preparation owing to unresolved objections on a great number of policies. We don't know what, it's not listed which of those policies are to which there are objections, so I don't know which of those policies that are perhaps in question, how they have a bearing on this site, so that's a concern. There's no indication about the amount of sill that might arise for this, which would be of benefit to both parish council with their neighbourhood plan, which also says this is not an acceptable site. They would get at least 25%, but again, we have the housing types described, or an indicative indication, so I don't understand why we can't be given an indication the sill would be payable. I also note that on one page, it says there are no one-bedroom houses, or no one-bedroom dwellings, and on the following page where it talks about affordable homes, it assumes 10 of these 54 affordable homes are one bed. So it seems to me a bit of a contradiction. I'll find the page if you want me to. And that brings me to my really key point, I think, is that in 7 separate locations in this report, great weight is attached to the idea that there's going to be 40% affordable homes. There's many more mentions of affordability in the report than that, but 7 of them are specific about that. And yet, there is no condition or no other means to show that this is going to be delivered. And we've seen time and time again, when it gets to reserve matters, the whole construction situation seems to change, costs have gone up, etc. It's not viable. So if we approve this tonight, it's mainly on the basis that there's going to be 135 homes that outweigh the harms. which are considerable, and there's going to be 40% affordable, but there is no guarantee that affordable homes will be delivered. So what happens if we get to a reserve matter situation and say it's not viable anymore, we can't produce any, or we can only produce 10? That completely undermines the whole argument for approving this. So is it possible to have a condition to ensure the delivery of those affordable homes, or does it not work like that?
Okay, I'll just come back on a few of those points. So regarding the affordable housing, as you'll see on the front page of the main report, the first planning obligation is for 40% on-site affordable housing. So as part of the Section 106 agreement for this application, it would secure 40% of the units as affordable at this stage. No. As part of this application, there will be an obligation to secure them as affordable. So the application is for up to 135 units. So at reserve matters, no more than 135 units could come forward, but in theory it could be less. So the obligation is requiring 40% of that final number of dwellings to be affordable units, and that is to be secured at this stage.
So a future viability assessment can't be presented to say it's not possible to do it?
So as part of the Section 106, as I said, the affordable housing will be secured. Sometimes after a Section 106 is signed and completed, a developer can come in with what's called a deed of variation to vary their planning obligations. An example is that when a scheme is not considered viable because of affordable housing contributions that are needing to be made. So I can't sit here and guarantee that this developer won't do that. However, all I can say is that 40% affordable units will be secured at this moment in time. One other thing I will mention is that within the first 5 years after a Section 106 agreement is signed, the LPA is not obliged to consider any deed of variation made by an applicant. So if within the first 5 years the developer comes in with a viability assessment and wants to remove their affordable housing obligation, the council do not have to consider it and they don't have to agree to it. After that first 5 years has elapsed, an applicant can formally submit for that viability to be considered and can appeal a decision made by the council. So if the council were to not agree the variation, they have that right to appeal. But within the first 5 years, there is no right to appeal. So the council retains an overall greater level of control within the first 5 years after a Section 106 agreement is signed. So hopefully that will give some comfort, but as I said, I can't guarantee or predict any future viability matters. But as it stands, a policy compliant 40% contribution is provided. In terms of your other points on overstretched facilities, so as you mentioned, the NHS contribution, that contribution is not finalised at this stage. That is because, as I mentioned, the number of units is not fixed at this stage. It's for up to 135. The NHS have provided a consultation response with what the contribution would be based on 135 units, and the contribution would be £122,336. But because the number of dwellings could change and be less than 135, it was considered that the obligation should be worded as a more formulaic approach to calculate what the contribution would be based on the final number of dwellings, and that's calculated on based on a formula provided by the NHS that would be included in the obligation. In terms of the Thames Water capacity issues, so it's acknowledged, as you've mentioned, by Thames Water that there are foul water drainage and sewage treatment provision capacity issues. However, ultimately, Thames Water haven't objected to the application on that basis. They've instead recommended conditions, and those are conditions 20, 21 and 22. And they require the applicant to demonstrate there is sufficient capacity, or for a phasing plan to be agreed with the council to stagger occupation of the dwellings so that the infrastructure is not overloaded all at one point in time. So with those conditions, Thames Water didn't raise objection on capacity grounds. Regarding SIL, as the residential element of this application is outlined, the SIL team did not provide detailed comments because SIL contributions are based on the size of dwellings, which is not known at this stage. However, the SIL contribution is in excess of £500 per square metre. So again, the total would be calculated at reserve matters stage. And then I think you had a point about the healer, which I think relates back to one of the first questions we had this evening. The site presented in the healer assessment is larger than the site we have today, albeit some of the conclusions in the healer are applicable to this scheme in terms of the landscape harm, a slight reduction in settlement gap, and that's acknowledged as shortcomings of this scheme too. But ultimately, the healer scheme and this scheme in terms of site areas are different, and so are not directly 100% comparable. Hopefully that covers your points, but anything else, please let me know.
Well, the point about the highways and the safety issue, but I guess that's...
I'll pass over to Alan on that.
Sorry, yes, again, in responding to the first comment about the right turning arrangement, suggested that variation of the traffic regulation order is a valid point, and we could potentially do that. Again, I was looking for some direction as to whether the applicant or not felt strongly about that. To take that one step further, if we were to put in a central medium, I was looking, whilst you were asking other questions, what might the implications of that be? I believe within the space, initially I was concerned about where the ditches lie, because I know that the loss of control and vehicles ending up in the ditch becomes a problem. Sorry, so I believe that it should be possible to do that. It could be done by way of introducing some curbs. So I don't think that would be exorbitantly expensive to do that. And again, I would like to think that if that's again a direction from members, I suspect that we could probably find a solution to that. Again, I appreciate that we're adding more costs to the developer, and that strains a number of issues. But again, if that's members' clear direction, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't take that away and get a formal direction from that to be able to inform the package of obligations. There are things currently in the package of obligations that we've discussed today that fit into a grey area of the School Road Arborfield scheme that was also allowed on tilted balance, has a planning obligation associated with access to bus stops, and there's a slight overlap in the application submission that we were hoping to get the 106 sorted on one before we confirm the heads of terms on this application. So I'd still like to think that there's a bit of latitude on both sides to be able to come to a compromise. So again, bearing in mind we might be talking of a few £1,000s or tens of thousands of pounds of difference on a right turn, a physical restriction to that right turning movement. I would like to think that there's some latitude of where we can get to, but again, I think we're just taking this as direction. If that's where members feel we need to be, I'd like to think that the applicants would be minded to do that, because it would be very easy to expend more than that kind of money on an appeal, and it would make sort of very commercial sense in my mind to do that rather than go down that avenue. But obviously we'd have to have that discussion. But clearly, if members are telling us that's what you think is necessary, you can take that away, and I believe that should be a sensible outcome.
Thank you.
Wait, yeah.
I want to come back to the viability thing in a moment, but I'll come to you first, Alan. So just so that I'm clear, Eversley Road and Observer Way, are we talking about you're not turning right out of the site? Observer Way, ignore Eversley at the moment.
Yes, so
we
but if that's members' direction, so at the moment, the discussion and the point of, in principle, agreement is that the developer would fund a traffic regulation order to ban right turns into that access from Observer Way. Based on where we're at in terms of discussion, I don't see any reason why that TRO could ban both right turns, right turn in and right turn out, because there is a U-turn option at the roundabout. To add in the physical restriction to stop vehicles turning right, don't think there's a significant cost to that. But again, I can take your direction, subject to resolution to grant, and hopefully refine that direction with the applicant in terms of heads of terms and legal agreement. Obviously,
so that's Observer Way.
Correct.
So no right turn out and no right turn in. I don't know if that fixes it. It improves it, but whatever you do on that road, if this does get approved tonight, we need to think about the speed on that road. So, but let's just hold your thought. Keep your powder dry on that. Then now let's go to Eversley Road. So what were you proposing to do different on Eversley Road?
So at the moment, Eversley Road, just north of the Observer Way roundabout, goes into a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, and that then transitions further up the road into a 30. Again, there are options to treat that slightly differently, again, if that's members' direction. But what the current discussions have established is that because of the land between Eversley Road and Baird Road, if you know it, is not in public ownership, is in private ownership. The application includes a pedestrian crossing, a toucan crossing, close to the Observer Way roundabout, and therefore offers a connection to the co-op, which is probably the closest facility. Now, there are other ways of achieving that same access, but that's the position that's been agreed with the applicant. So there is an urbanisation of that section of street, so there is the prospect that we combine other measures in there, which again, subject to your direction, if that gets us to a point where we have a resolution to grant consent, that we could take that away and refine the heads and terms and direction so that we are able to agree with the applicants what the precise package is.
Because Connie was explaining to us on site, because we had a good walk around this, that some falls under the requirements to the other developer. Some could sit here. We also had a discussion about the removal of the subway, potentially yes or no. So we had that, you know, there's a view that to get rid of it, and there's a view not to get rid of it, or there's options not to get rid of it. So we're saying as you come, if I can just keep us focused on this junction, you know, the 5-arm. Oh yeah, it might be a good idea. Because you're saying at that roundabout, going in, I refer to it as near the British Legion, that we go 40 then into a 30. Sorry, am I going into too much detail? Oh, right. So, yeah, so if you take where we were, Connie, so if you look at So the entrance to the site off the Eversley Road, just there, that's it, brilliant, where your cursor is. So you're suggesting that you can flow in just one way. You obviously can't turn right. But you
No,
turn
the access to the site from Eversley Road roundabout
Yep.
Will be all turning movements.
Okay.
It's only restriction to the existing observer way,
Right,
which is
okay.
currently a field gate.
Right, that's where I was confused because you
Okay,
mentioned Eversley
yeah.
Road earlier. But that section of road on the Eversley Road, not Langley Common, we'll come back to the footpaths to Beard Road in a moment. That's currently just 40 on that stretch, did you say?
Sorry, roughly where between the two roundabouts, where the tree line starts, that's where it changes from national speed limit to 40.
Right, so we go 50, 40, go through the village and it's 30.
Yes.
That's why you see those cars coming along there at some pace. Okay, thanks for that. Connie, can I just go back to this point of viability, just so that I'm absolutely clear? So, this gets approved tonight, say, and the applicant within 5 years come back and say, we want to test this because we're going down the viability route. It is not working out. We want to reduce the 40% down to 20%. We have the option to say yes or no, but if they're going down the viability route and they've got a good viability argument, I was under the impression we had to review it because it's happening all over this borough. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, so our local plan, the NPPF, it makes it very clear that that developers' viability is something that is a material consideration. Otherwise, we sterilise sites. Sorry, there's an echo. Yeah, we as a local authority would sterilise a site which otherwise, because of economic circumstances, material costs, contamination, unexpected, whatever, we would have sites that wouldn't come forward. And obviously, we need those sites. And so again, if we take the example of 20% affordable, which now, from a developer's perspective, is viable, but 40% isn't, the question the council must ask itself is, if the books have been shown, we have the financial viability appraiser, and we have independently verified that with the valuer, which we do, and we scrutinise that. If they come back saying, yes, give an allowance for profit margin, overheads, materials, etc., abnormals, this is a justified and sound position, then again, the council would be looking purely at the deed of variation to the league agreement. We're not reopening the planning permission as such, because remember, there's no change to the approved plans. We're looking at part of the heads of terms. Likewise, if if another obligation was found to not be viable or needed to be amended, the deed of variation route is open. And often we're focusing at the committee here on an affordable housing provision going from policy compliant down. But as you also know, we get them going from policy compliant up to 100% or higher levels. So it does work both ways. A site may be granted for 40% affordable housing, and we may receive a subsequent deed of variation to increase that to 100%. So again, it isn't just a one-way street.
Yeah, but my understanding is correct, that in that 5 years, if they've got a viability, or if they've got a good viability argument and they're prepared to go open book, and that all complies, I'm not saying this is a Wokingham thing, it all complies with the NPPF, they can do that within the 5 years. Yes.
Carol.
Just a couple of simple questions. When you're talking about the SANG and highways, I presume when you're talking about highways, you're talking about the cars coming to the housing estate. Have you factored in the extra people coming in to go to look at the SANGs, especially if you're going to remove the parking from Observer Way? So you've got all the houses coming off that roundabout and into the housing estate. Because I know where I live, we have a lot of people come down to walk their dogs. So I know you can't really justify how much, but I presume it will increase.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah,
good,
no.
good. we end up starting to pick through individual numbers of vehicles, which makes life very difficult. The government has removed the what was a threshold of material consideration, and that in terms of numbers of vehicles, the application is for up to 135 dwellings as being presented. That's based on our accepted trip rates, around 78 two-way vehicle movements during the busiest peak hour of the day. The level of SANG use might, at that same peak hour, might increase that very slightly, so we might be talking about 80 vehicles. So once you've distributed that over the network, it very quickly dissipates to the point where it's not necessarily material. Not to say that it doesn't add traffic, because it does. There is a degree of harm from that. But again, come back to the point in the officer's presentation, does it significantly and demonstrably outweigh the proposals as they stand? That's the test. The test goes further in the NPPF as to whether the cumulative residual effect is severe. We're sure we can have some discussions about how that's dealt with. In terms of applying the tilted balance, we've looked at NPPF paragraph 117, and as part of that, as a vision-led approach, we're acknowledging that there is a need to provide for alternatives to the car, and in that sense, the package of obligations that we've discussed and explored with the applicant to largely substantially improve the cycle network so as to mitigate and offset that impact proportionally to the scale of development, hence the vision-led approach. Now, is that a perfect match? No. Is there residual harm? That's a matter of judgment. My judgment is that it's finely balanced and that we've gone, I think, as far as we reasonably can in the circumstances, and hence the officer's recommendation, which I endorse. Obviously, it's for you as members to make some judgments as to whether or not you agree or whether you disagree, and then, if you disagree, to provide us that evidence of where the significant and demonstrable material considerations would demonstrate otherwise. And that's where we need your direction. And I think there's some points that you're making that I believe we could agree with the applicant, and there are some things that I think stretch us beyond what we can credibly insist upon. But again, it's your decision. It's within your gift to direct us. I feel strongly that we've found the best balance we can, and I would endorse officer's recommendation.
Okay, well, I just want to echo, I have some concerns. I mean, I want to, you know, when we discussed Langley Common Road in 2024, I think there was 50 sites. I was already had some concerns about the traffic. And I recognize this site offers, you know, 135, which will work towards, you know, which is going to be given significant rates, also the 40%. I recognize that one. I hear the issue about the flooding, but I think I see potential that this could actually control the flooding and drainage in that area. So maybe it's there. The SANG, I can see that one, but I have concerns about the access, mainly from unobserved way. I think that is risky. At the moment, what I see, I found that dangerous. Yeah, I mean, I know you're trying to, and I recognize that you've tried to mitigate it with some things, probably offside part, but that it's not a like for like in my case. And I also have concerns about that roundabout. So that's where I am. I don't know where the rest of the committee is. So
without designing the scheme, and you're the expert, Alan, Mike mentioned from the bridge down 30. Is that a complete no-go? I mean, I don't want you to design it now, but is that a complete no-go based on that road? Because I understand the issue of not turning right into the site and not turning right out, but I just think you're going to cause yourself a problem here, whatever we do. I mean, the ideal thing would be put a roundabout in there, but that's going to cost a fortune. But then you've got like roundabout, it'd be, be like Milton Keynes. What can you offer us to try and alleviate our concerns?
Okay. In terms of speed-related issues, I think the Department for Transport circular is exceptionally good in as far as it sets a very clear measure that when you've got development on one side of the road for more than 600 metres, then it's a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. If you've got development on both sides of the road, then it makes sense for it to be 30 miles per hour. So in terms of arrangements here, there's no reason why we can't start to rationalise the speed limits, and with the infrastructure that's being delivered, to start to combine those efforts to substantially change the speed environment that I think many of you are concerned about. Now, again, those measures are things that we can take away and again discuss with the applicant. I'd like to think that they could be combined into the same traffic regulation order discussions, and there might be a small cost associated with that. So I'd again be reassured that that's sufficiently small that we could take a direction as to how those heads of terms could be discussed and hopefully agreed. Now, I'd like to think that that gives us significant improvement to where we are. Speed limits do not necessarily mean compliance with the speed limit, and too many times we see people put in a speed limit that's too low for the environment, and drivers read it differently and travel at speeds higher. Part of the efforts here is that, as you said, Councillor Smith, that there are a series of junctions which contribute to slower speeds through this section. That's evidenced in the observed flows and speeds in this area. Further crossings would reduce those speeds still further. The presence of residential development on both sides of the road would also change that environment. So speeds will come down. Whether they come down quite to the point where there are no accidents, that comes down to the way that the engineering arrangements are designed to ensure that drivers read it as they should do for the appropriate speed. Now, all of those things I think are achievable within any Section 278 package of delivering those works. And again, I would reinforce that those are what are before you in terms of heads of terms for us to go away and agree the detail with the applicants. If you are providing us with those directions, I would like to think that those small changes, again, could be achievable. But obviously, if they're not, then we would obviously be expected to come back to you with a subsequent committee direction, or whether or not, so I'm looking to my planning colleagues to direct me because I'm straying outside of my area. But I believe a package can be agreed and that it ultimately can lead us to an acceptable scheme. But again, this comes back to the tilted balance that is impressed upon us, as you originally started, Councillor Smith, that central government are saying we must build additional houses, and that's the balance that we're faced with. However uncomfortable and unenviable it is, we are where we are. The application is as it stands. We believe as officers that it's acceptable. Would like to endorse officers' recommendations.
Yes, thank you. I'm not convinced that the speed limit, changing the speed limit, lowering it, will solve the problems, because the problem seems to be the right-hand turn. And I think Catherine Caroline mentioned that will people just ignore the fact they can't turn right and whiz in? Because if you're going up Observer Way away from Arborfield, the next chance you've got to turn around is probably the opening just before the the footbridge, if I remember rightly, there's a scoop in. If you're going the other way, yes, you can go round the roundabout, whatever. So I don't think the speed limits are an issue. They might make it safer. I think there's not only that the highways are an issue for me, it's actually being outside the SDL boundary, I think is a real problem, and the impact on landscaping, or the landscape. And I think all of those together, for me, is just isn't right. I'm not happy with the application at all.
Mike?
So, bearing in mind what the highways officer has said, do we need to make a proposal that if this is approved, we would require design or viability looked at for a physical barrier to prevent right turns in and out of that entry?
I mean, those other options. I mean, I'm struggling with this as well. I know Alan is maybe trying to find some solutions, but I mean, I'm even thinking about maybe come back or something. What about a deferment at the moment? Because at the moment, I don't like it either the way it is. I know there are some options. Is it possible for us to explore those options and then have another look at it, or?
Okay, so I don't wish to undermine anything that Alan has just said, but ultimately the Local Highways Authority have not objected to this application based on the scheme as presented at the moment and based on the package of obligations that are proposed in the report. It's not really for renegotiation at this meeting to redesign or impose further obligations, we feel as planning officers, given that there is no objection and no technical deficiencies in the submission to warrant a refusal on highway grounds. And I think we would be in a tricky situation if this application were to be refused and go to appeal, based on the comments from the highways team that don't support the concerns that you're raising as members, unfortunately.
I don't think, Connie, we're suggesting that. I think we're asking for a deferral so that we can look at some of these amendments. But I do take your point.
Yeah, I would just add that I suppose the amendments are not needed for us to come to a positive recommendation.
Okay, I mean, I can, if I look at it, this one, we have the principle of developments. It doesn't meet those priorities, but that is not a showstopper initially. I do have some concerns about this salami slicing, that we are having a local plan in the approval stages. This is not part of it. I think we've already had Reading Road approved. Reluctantly, we approved Langley Common. This will put additional strain on this area. I recognize we are in the 2.5, we're not meeting the 5-year land supply. We're having, this 135 dwellings will add weight to that one. But I'm also a bit puzzled by the comments from the inspector on the north of Reading side, that she gives low weight to the local plan, but still says that a lot of the assumptions that the local plan will happen is in favor of that side. So I'm struggling a little bit with that one. And I'm struggling with the highway access. I've seen that road. The moment I'm struggling with I hear Alan's, and I recognize that highways have tried to mitigate it or put mitigation actions in it, and those are on other parts, which they've tried to balance. They said, like, if this is difficult, but we have something somewhere else that's sort of off-sided and maybe part of the bigger scheme, but that doesn't, for me, mitigate the real points at these points. That is my view. I don't know if anybody else has a different view.
Chair, thanks, Chair. Can I just jump in on the point regarding members' concerns kind of over a safe right-hand turn? Now, obviously, this is something that we are not here and now able to test as effective, if it will achieve the intended purposes members wish it to achieve. If that is the outstanding factor here between an acceptable and an unacceptable scheme, then like any additional planning condition that members decide may be necessary to impose upon a recommendation, an application, then members could reasonably ask that a condition is imposed to demonstrate safe right-hand turn into or off of Observer Way, and submit the information to us. Now, that hasn't been agreed with the applicant, and so there's no guarantee that will be accepted, and so therefore a deferral would have to take place or a recommendation subject to that condition, and if the condition is not agreed, then it would need to come back to committee. But it doesn't necessarily address the wider suite of concerns that members have talked about. So just a sort of word of warning, by focusing on one specific right-hand turn as the balance between acceptable and unacceptable, it may not necessarily help members in coming to an overall conclusion, as Alan has said earlier, in balancing the harms against the benefits. Now, if there is harm and members feel that harm demonstrably outweighs the identified benefits, then we would need to have that presented to us. Deferrals need planning reasons. We need a reason why we would defer. So deferring to explore an option, which may or may not make a scheme acceptable, probably wouldn't be sufficient. So there's a couple of points there. Moving sort of beyond the position that the local highway authority have not objected to this scheme, subject to conditions and the obligations, any requirements listed in the beginning page of the agenda. We can run through those obligations, whether it be NHS, open space, SANG, TRO, access, they're all listed for members. So again, it may be worth just having a look at those before we proceed. And then we can possibly come back to that issue if it is fundamental.
Mike.
I did have a couple of concerns about the items listed in that front area. I don't think it's particular to this application, but for the SAMM contribution, I was kind of wondering why it's not a linear set of figures. You know, why is a four-bedroom house much cheaper in terms of its contribution than a one-bedroom house? I would have thought the monitoring was about the same, but I guess that's a tariff. That's nothing to do with this application. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah, and the tariff set by Natural England.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'll ignore that then. Item 15, internal site roads, confirmation as to their status adopt remain private and standards these should be built to. It talks somewhere else in the report about the roads being built to an adoptable standard to be agreed. We've got a number of areas of new development where the roads have not been adopted because they're not to a standard that the council require. So is that a strong enough condition to make sure that the roads are designed, specified and constructed to an acceptable standard? Because we've got lots and lots of concerns nationally about leasehold and the high cost of management companies. There's lots of estates around the country, including one I used to have a property on, where the residents are being caned and the roads are not being maintained by the contractor. The council doesn't want anything to do with them because they either don't provide a public amenity or because they just don't want anything to do with them, or they're not the right standard. I don't know whether it's still the case, but Hatch Farm Way, as I understand it, has not been adopted yet. Because it's not an acceptable standard. Yeah, it's a busy road. So I'm concerned about that item 15 on page 11, as to whether it's strong enough.
So in terms of highway adoption, the council's got much better, as you're alluding. Developers have sought to consider their options as to whether they offer streets for adoption or whether they keep them private. We have tightened up our procedures. We've looked at the case law. We've taken legal advice. We now incorporate a number of steps in the planning process. So because this is an outline application, we've identified an obligation to notify us as part of the planning process of the intent to offer streets for adoption. That's more to enable us to utilise the Private Street Works Code to its effective extent, to ensure that if it's not going to be private, that's clear, and that future residents are very aware of that. We can take steps to ensure that the roads are built to adoptable standards, but we cannot force the developer to offer the streets for adoption. There is, in fairness to the developers, some balance there in terms of overall costs, because there are costs associated with delivering streets that are formally adopted, and sometimes they may choose, like the example you've given in Hatch Farm Way, where the developers choose not to offer streets for adoption. Now, that should be made clear to potential buyers and occupiers at the point of sale. Again, we've reinforced that through legal provisions to make sure that that's clearer for residents, so that they know, in your colloquial term, the fleecehold political football that gets kicked around, that needs to be clearer, and for people to have that made clear to them at the point of sale. There are potential challenges to that at some point in time. So we've done what we can to address that issue, and trust that that is not, as it is in this application, material consideration that you need to worry about. We're doing what we need to do to address those issues post-planning and effectively post reserve matters stage, which is not before you. So I understand the question, but it's not a significant point other than to list it as an obligation for them to tell us of their intention of offering it for adoption or not.
So condition 36, highway construction details, where they have to submit details and for them to be approved in writing by the local planning authority. You can't strengthen that condition to say, and for the avoidance of doubt, this means they have to be to an adoptable standard that the council set.
Yeah, sorry, that you can't increase planning obligations beyond what there are other statutory powers for. So the Private Street Works Code is that legal power, so we shouldn't be duplicating it. So there's that condition there to supplement and aid that Streetworks Code. There is the 106 obligation to notify us as to whether or not they intend to offer it for adoption. So that's why I'm saying that that's part of the council's efforts and processes to try and narrow down the issues that you're concerned about, so that we're not repeating the unfortunate circumstances that some residents feel that they are in that fleecehold category.
Okay, so you just said you can't do more than what it sets elsewhere. Somewhere else in here where it's talking about energy, we're setting a 10% requirement above building regulations level. Isn't that going beyond the legal requirement? Not highways.
Sorry, perhaps I might need to defer to legal for further advice on this, but I appreciate it's a complex subject. There, under the Highways Act, Section 38 of the Highways Act requires a developer to offer it for, enables the developer to offer parts of the street for highway adoption. That is agreement between the developer and the council, whether it's offered to the council for adoption. Where it is not offered, there is a private streetworks code, which is also included in the Highways Act. What you're referring to there in terms of energy is part of the building regulations, which is a different entity in terms of the build process. It's not a statutory provision, as is the Highways Act.
Okay. We're now at a very difficult position, but maybe I'll start. Is anybody... we've heard all the pros and cons. I mean, there are definitely cons on this project, including the housing, of course, and the significant the work that is done on the SANG and the issues. But there are also of the pros, there are definitely pros and there are definitely cons. We are in the tilted balance, so means that I think I can understand why officers have reached their conclusion, but I'm not sure we all share that same balance. I think that is where the issue is. But is there anybody who wants to propose currently the officer's recommendation? Oh, go ahead.
So the basis of the recommendation primarily is the addition of 135 houses to the borough's housing need, of which 40% will be affordable, although that's not entirely certain. But we've got concerns over harm to the landscape, that it's in conflict with both the past and the future spatial strategy, albeit on a slightly different site. We have highways concerns of both safety and capacity, also concerns about the ability of the sewage systems to cope, even though they've raised no objections, nor the highways. We've got the HELA, which talks about it's inappropriate in terms of the existing settlement form and character, and we've got encroachment on the separation of the two communities. All of which does that add up to sufficient harm to go against that, the benefit? And that's not, I'm really struggling with this.
I think the HELA doesn't.
Yeah, so it's a very, it's a logical way of looking at the kind of disbenefits of the scheme, absolutely. Some of those things you've listed, take landscape, for example, visual impact landscape, it's probably, we could probably argue, has a greater weight against the scheme than something like a top-level HELA assessment, a site appraisal in the policy-making stage. That's very limited weight. We've got no objections from many technical consultees on this one, and we haven't got any convincing evidence otherwise. If we're looking at precedent of the committee's decision to approve the 50 dwellings Langley Common Road, the issues that committee grappled with for that determination, we look at the recent allowed appeals, not just nearby this site, but wider afield. Many of the concerns that you have raised here were raised equally in those parts of the borough where the other developments were located. Near to this site, we have the school road, land north of Reading Road, northwest of Arborfield Cross, the recently allowed appeals scheme. They're very different sites, different scale of development, but landscape impact, location in relation to existing settlements, traffic, transport, access, were all kind of, there's synergies there between both sites. Drainage was a very significant issue on that application, along with trees. we don't have necessarily that level of concern here. So again, that should give members an idea whether we like the conclusions or not, and whether we agree with the conclusions or not. We've got a suite of appeal decisions which have chewed over pretty much most of the issues that we're chewing over now. There is risks if you are proceeding with a refusal on certain grounds. Officers' view is that the benefits outlined to you, including the SANG, including the social benefits of new housing, new homes, and the affordable housing, which we cannot, and I would advise against giving less weight because there's a risk it could disappear in future. What we have is 40%. So if 40% was delivered, what weight do we give that? It's a positive social weight. Hypothetically, what may happen in the future, the site may never come forward anyway, but hypothetically, we can't use that against the scheme because something might happen. So in front of us is a red line, 135, saying, here's the facts on the ground. Here's our technical consultees input with no objections. We know there is an existing situation here. Anecdotally, in reality, measured or otherwise with traffic, we know that. But again, the same with the drainage and the photos we saw earlier from the occupiers of Duck's Nest Farm. That's an existing situation. This site needs to, through the measures and mitigation that Alan's outlined, needs to wash its own face in effect. And officers believe it does that to the best of its abilities. None of it's precise. So again, when we're talking about dog walkers or we're talking about the SANG or who's going to turn left or right, that is very specific. And we're not going to be able to give you assurances on who's going to turn left and right and who's going to walk their dog to the SANG. But as a complete position, and looking at the very detailed planning balance that's been presented to you, you'll see that it is not a clear-cut decision. And the 5-year housing land supply doesn't make this scheme acceptable. It doesn't make a bad scheme acceptable. It just means the scheme is assessed under that weighing scales. So again, councils like ours are in a difficult position, and communities may be exposed to development they're not expecting. And this is one of those sites, as with the other ones we've faced the last few years. But the tilted balance is not a free pass. Still need to assess the harms and the benefits. Thanks, Chair.
You mentioned just there, Brian, was that the site on the Reading Road which was recently refused for 110, was it?
111.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. It's for this community. This is the gift that keeps giving. You know, they've got the garrison, you know, and they've got these other sites, and you know, it's difficult. But when, as I said right at the beginning, when you read, I was astonished to read this report. I suppose the only thing you could say that if this was approved this evening, or sorry, refused this evening, and then it went to appeal, you would hope by the time it come out of the blocks, we would have our local plan approved by the inspector. But then I don't know that answer, because this scheme wouldn't be with us tonight if that plan was in place.
Karen?
Yeah, difficult one. It is all about the tilted balance, and the tilted balance is subjective. And I understand where the planning officers are coming from, and that was very clearly stated by Brian just now. But I think the members here have stated it, they're looking at it from a different angle. We're all, well, not all local members, but we all know the area very well. And that is the benefit of having a committee. If we don't have this ability to say, look, enough is enough, in our view, these are issues that affect this area, then we don't need a committee almost. It's going to be decided by appeal. So I still feel that we should have a proposal to not accept the officer's recommendation on the grounds, I think, many of which that Mike suggested, and go from there.
Mike?
Yeah, I did the comment in 3.29, I think it is, which says, you know, the LPU isn't given much weight because it's still in the examination stage. And there are some objections to some of the policies. We don't know what they're, today, I'm sitting here, I don't know what those objections are. My understanding is that the second stage has examination meetings have concluded when lots of these things were examined. And that sometime between now and whenever, we will get a letter stating what their concerns are with anything. And by inference, anything not mentioned in that letter, they must be happy with. That could almost be imminent in the next couple of months. And that could make a whole difference in how we would view an application like this. So I am concerned that we're just this is trying to just squeeze in under the bar whilst we're waiting for the inspectors to make their decision. I understand particularly take a point what Brian Conlon said about the fact that our concerns tonight are exactly the same as concerns expressed by other similar applications in the vicinity where the inspectors have allowed the appeal. And that does concern me because it has an effect on our ability to retain control over our planning authority, not to mention the costs if we do end up with having to make an appeal. So I'm really, really finding it's a very difficult situation.
Thanks, Mike. Just to sort of remind members that we obviously, our current local plan has a kind of anticipated adoption in 2027. Okay, so next year. And, you know, the next stage is obviously, as you say, Councillor Smith, we will expect shortly, I'm not sure how soon, it could be months, a letter back. And that will contain most likely main modifications or, you know, indication of which direction, where we are aligned or where we're not. And then it may be there's another round of implementing those modifications, but that's where the status of the plan changes. It doesn't have full weight because it's not adopted, it's not a made plan, but it obviously certain policies will be agreed and certain won't. However, in parallel to that, as you would have noted, Wayne Smith mentioned earlier, with the council's current local plan, transitional arrangements for which it's being prepared, and the fact that despite anticipated adoption in 2027, we've started preparing, but we are starting to prepare a new local plan up to 2045, which takes over almost immediately once this one is adopted. And we have an incredibly tight time frame in which to prepare that local plan. As part of that local plan, a call for sites in that new local plan has gone live. So the process, which the council will be looking at sites, and there may be many sites that are put forward in this call for sites, some good, some ugly, but there may be many sites which have the council we are already aware of. And it may be that, you know, sites that are less desirable than the ones we're presented with, and or the same sites we're presented with come forward, especially if they're included within that local plan, call for sites, and we have outstanding appeals. So this is not viewed in isolation. By refusing an application in order to buy time, the system doesn't necessarily allow that. And any refusal reason over prematurity of a new local plan coming in seldom is defensible. So again, coming back to the material harm, if members believe that, for example, landscape harm or highway impact, despite the information that's provided to you, if you believe that that harm outweighs the benefits significantly demonstrably outweighs the benefits, then that's what needs to be presented, and you need to explain how, and how landscape harm on part of the site with the associated benefit of that SANG, how that SANG or other benefits are not given as much weight. That hasn't been articulated yet.
We've got a problem because Highways never objected. So if we refuse it tonight, we go to appeal, how are we going to defend that? Well, I know the answer. It's be damn difficult. I mean, landscape is a very subjective, very different, and we haven't really discussed that much this evening. Although it's a fantastic site, and when we were up there on that footpath on Friday, it's I've never walked up there before, but it's a fantastic site. But as you quite rightly say, we've got to then articulate that into the tilted balance of harm to refuse it this evening. I mean, it was interesting that the inspector on the previous one on the Reading Road did actually say that Wokingham need to commence their new local plan by June. So it's almost getting a dictate from government. To get out quickly with the call for sites. So we haven't got this one approved, and we're on to the next one, and that's the point you were making. Committees are going to become very tricky.
Okay. I still don't feel there's anybody. I still have issues with my issues also, and Alan, I know for me, you have tried to mitigate, the highways have tried to mitigate some of these issues by doing some offsites, and I recognize that one, but is that actually addressing enough my concerns at this site? That's what I'm struggling with, and I don't know, and I think everybody is struggling with that one if I look around that one. I know I have also issues with the principle of development, but I know what those have different issues. I know there's also the reduced settlement separations, but I mean, and some of the other issues raised, but for me, that is a little bit my sticking point to really say, like, hey, I can go after, or I can sort of reluctantly accept this one, if you see what I mean, but I don't know, so that's where I'm at.
I mean, the officers made clear in the report that the principle of development is in conflict with the local plan. All these sites are. None of these are unusual. These are speculative applications on undeveloped land outside of existing settlements. Members may look at it in a slightly more arbitrary or maybe a more in terms of more comparisons, it might be easier to ask the question as to whether this application, in terms of housing numbers, affordable housing and SANG as a basic 3, putting aside any obligations that it's required through SIL or anything else, is that package of 3 chief primary benefits, are they in excess of what we have secured on other sites? Does, for example, a site for 50 houses come with as much benefit without any SANG? Same contributions proportionately. Likewise, Reading Road, no SANG, open space, but again, putting it into a simplistic term, each application is sitting with, we talked about this before, on a spectrum of harm. Not every application can be the worst application, that's ever come across the committee's desk. Some have different strengths, some have different weaknesses. And so again, where we are framed by appeal decisions, committee's own decisions on major applications. Where does this sit?
Yeah, Catherine?
Well, given what Brian's just said, I mean, although I still feel the same about the highways issues, as Wayne says, they wouldn't be defensible at an appeal. And maybe the benefits do outweigh the disbenefits. If you set aside the highways problems.
Carol?
Yeah, yes, again, we are faced with this. It's a perennial problem for this committee, I think. The only way I could begin to feel more comfortable with accepting the officer's conditional approval recommendation is to have a condition about the highways, because I think we have uncovered in the meeting today the concerns about the right-hand turn, etc., which clearly wasn't a concern when the recommendations was made by the Highway Authority. And I think it is just an accident waiting to happen. And I think we should be adding a condition about investigating ways of making it safer or ameliorating the impact of the highways.
I feel exactly the same way as Carol on that. I think probably the benefits do outweigh the harm, but we do need something done about the safety on Observer Way, because I don't think it's been given sufficient consideration.
Alan, is there anything we can, I mean, Mike Wayne has already asked something about this one. Is there anything we,
So thank you, Chair. And members, I entirely understand your deliberations, and I share many of your concerns and of Councillor Betteridge on behalf of his ward. Clearly there is a significant pressure on this authority. Unfortunately, the NPPF does set the bar exceptionally high in the tests in the NPPF, that the cumulative residual effects must be severe. In the case of Reading Road, just for your understanding, we presented an argument that ultimately said, in terms of the NPPF, we had microsimulation modelling that demonstrated the scale of impact on the A327 corridor at the Black Boy roundabout, and presented that as saying that material consideration there started to impact the statement of common ground that we'd had agreed with National Highways as to how we were going to protect Junction 11. Unfortunately, the picking and choosing of, as members have described and discussed, in that decision, the members, the planning inspectorate seems to have picked the things that she wanted to in favour and dismissed those against. So we share your same frustrations. In terms of this application, we've had to pick very carefully how we take this application, and we've tried to look at the same levels of harm with the same measure of what is a material consideration on the 327 corridor at Black Boys. The evidence we had and what we presented was that ultimately in the vision-led approach, that the traffic congestion started to compromise the bus priority measure that would arise as a consequence of further development, reducing the effectiveness of that mode shift. In terms of this application, we're looking at a cycle infrastructure package that gives an alternative that combines a series of public rights-of-way improvement plans and other commitments to deliver crossings that deliver that alternative. Now, the cycle trips that facilitates are quite different to that argument. So on balance, we say that is a slight positive, that in the overall realm of the balance of material considerations, we consider this to be acceptable. Now, if members take a different view, as Brian has suggested this evening, we need your direction as to where those material harms would arise so that we've had that debate and discussion, so that we can be clear as to what we could or might be able to defend. Not that I or we as the Highway Authority probably can defend that, but we need to be clear if we were to appoint consultants if the application were to go to appeal. If not, then the members need to take that uncomfortable position of understanding that individual members might be representing the authority on those material considerations to defend that appeal, and bearing in mind what happened at the Reading Road appeal decision, I would not think our chances are that positive. So again, that's why I would reinforce that officer's recommendation as it is. If there are tiny points about the safety of Observer Way, I believe they could be overcome. But obviously, you know, I'm taking direction from my planning colleagues as to whether or not you can delegate that responsibility to us in any decision that you make for that, the development to be approved, subject to whatever those obligations are. Now, obviously, if that's not the case, that's a different thing.
I don't disagree, Alan, but when we were on site, there was lots of discussion, rightly, that not so much on Observer Way, there was concern, but then when we got down to the roundabout and the crossing, etc., we were talking about, as I said earlier, an underpass, getting rid of it, and doing away with it in conjunction with the other development. So I think there's still moving parts here. What we want reassurance is that those moving parts will be addressed by the highways team, because I don't think it's just Observer Way. Because when you stand where we were stood on Friday, on a quiet Friday, 10 o'clock, those cars don't half go around there, and you can see the people coming to that roundabout. You just stand there for 5 minutes and they're like, walk, and then they're off, and then you've got to expect people on this scheme to walk across that section. So I just think there needs to be a review of that in conjunction with the other development stuff that you're going to have to do anyway. But now you've got this, or potentially got this, it might slightly change some of those other. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So it probably hasn't come through clearly enough, and I hope if I give you an explanation of where we've got to, because this application, you're quite right, fits with multiple other applications. So in terms of commitments from other developments, if you're looking at the aerial map, as you see there, what I describe as a triangular site just north of Langley Common Road, that site has also got a planning consent. And just by the bus stops on Langley Common Road, there is already a commitment that is about to be implemented, probably this summer, but may drift into the autumn, to deliver a Toucan crossing there and join parts of the cycle network that connect you through Baird Road and to Arborford Green Centre. So those things are already committed. In terms of the safety of Eversley Road, as part of those works on Langley Common Road, that crossing involves the replacement of the level crossing into a control crossing. The subway is removed, and the ramps going to that subway are also removed. As part of these proposals, the application includes a new crossing north of that roundabout that effectively takes you to Rickman Close and joins those parts of the cycle network together with the site. To the south, let me just pan up slightly. A little bit more, sorry, and you'll see just as we get onto the edge of that roundabout, there's a strange convoluted pedestrian cycle route that goes across the land between Eversley Road and Baird Road. There's a proposed crossing of that point, which also joins those. So those crossings combine to address the severance that occurs from Eversley Road, because the traffic flows are high enough that pedestrians won't otherwise cross and that, I hope, addresses the immediate point of access there in terms of addressing those pedestrian cycle movements. Zoom out a bit more. The next part is further north through the Sang, up at Hart Close. There's an obligation there to pedestrian cycle emergency access emerges onto Hart Close there, and how we deliver, I've tried to explain, skirt over it, but there's a complicated position that the School Road site has identified pedestrian refuse island roughly where the Eversley Road connection takes you through to Link Way slightly further north. But the applicants here have proposed a controlled crossing. Now, what we're balancing is too many controlled crossings along the same section, trying to find the right balance between the two developments so that we can refine exactly what gets delivered there. But ultimately, that connects us through to Cole Lane, much further out. As we go out to the northeast of Arborfield Cross, and takes you to the cycle routes, or the public rights of way, that then take you out towards Loddon Garden Village and the connection to Reading. That also, again, much further out, also provides a connection to the east that links that part of the rights of way improvement to a crossing at Sandy Lane, Doles Lane, as part of a connection ultimately that takes you to Fish Ponds Road and Molly Millers. That joins the wider network together to provide the alternative. Now, Barkham Square, Arborfield Green, Arborfield Studios are working on, it says, hopefully a package that joins the southern route south of Barkham Road to do something similar, and we're working with the applicants to come up with a package that could or might be acceptable for those. Now, all of these form part of a wider package, which I appreciate gets very complicated because we've got lots of different developers doing lots of different separate parts that are proportionate to their development. This is 135 houses. The proportion of their 135 houses is to provide what we believe is a fair package of measures, as we've discussed at reasonable length this evening, how they join together, and think that's proportionate to the scale of development. Now, obviously, there are other developments coming forward of greater scale that would be expected to complement and supplement that, solar farm being part of that get into a melee of multiple individual parts that join together, deliver a network. We could, as an authority, combine all of those into planning obligations and deliver it ourselves. We have chosen as an authority, because of the risks associated with delivery, that we will ask the developers to deliver some and that we will deliver others. That's the balance of SIL and the balance of additional access improvement works which are before you this evening, that hopefully present a fair and balanced scheme to say that we believe and consider this application as being acceptable. On balance, it is a tilted balance, it's not perfect balance as Brian's indicated this evening. We would like to think that that's acceptable to you, but again, I appreciate that you're entitled to your view. We may not have done enough to convince you, the applicant may not have done enough to convince you, but that's not the test. The test is, can we demonstrate demonstrable harm that outweighs the benefits? And that, I'm afraid, as officers, we haven't heard that yet this evening. So we either need to hear what that is, and I can offer your opinion as to what may or may not be acceptable. As I said, the Observer Way, I think, is a relatively low-cost solution. I keep looking to the applicants saying that if we could accept everything else, there's probably a solution that we can come to there. I don't think is insurmountable. The rest of it, unfortunately, need clear direction as to what we can or can't do. Is that sufficient for you? Sorry.
Okay. I hear you guys. Yeah, well, I'm struggling with this one. This is, I mean, I have my issues, but I also know these are the same issues we have raised over and over again. And every time at appeal, the inspector has overturned them or ignored them or just picked out the positive things and not the negative things, as Alan said, because we're gonna, you know, the same thing here. If we would say this has issues with one side, the inspector will ignore those a bit and just pick out the positive sides on a different side. So what I may do, I'll say, as to maybe change the deadlock, is that maybe I'll make a proposal that we support this one under the condition that additional work will be done on this, for me, access to the observable way, because for me that is still the biggest issue. I mean, this has many issues also on the other side, but I also recognize that highways has not objected to it, and that what we find is the other way around. So I will make a proposal. I don't know if I have a second or, oh, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, could I just clarify then on the point of a condition to address the observer way access turning issue? I'd like to just be specific and make sure members are aware of what that means before you go to a vote, if that makes sense. So talking about a condition, so it would be, to start with, we've not got any agreement from the applicant at this stage, but my assumption is members would be looking at pre-commencement condition. So information would need to be provided to us as the local planning authority in advance of development commencing. Okay, and then we would be seeking a scheme, by interpretation, a scheme to prevent right-hand turns onto observer way from the access and from observer way into the access. Now, we already have under the heads of terms, wherever it was.
Yeah, number 16, bullet
16.
point 4. So associated with the SANG access on the A327 observer way, under traffic regulation order to ban right turning movements into the access. So that's already been agreed. It would just be the right turns out.
And also maybe because there is a cycle path going, people coming down that cycle path, which will be at that crossing. I think that maybe, I'm not sure, this is for me suboptimal what is there now, and maybe.
Again, it would be having the evidence that what is being proposed is suboptimal, because the danger is that if we don't have that evidence, we would request a change which may make something worse without any evidence that that change is going to be safe.
I mean, I could cycle down this hill at a certain speed, and you will come here at this crossing, and if they don't look for you, you're going to be, there's going to be a challenge there, yeah, because it's downhill. So that is my.
I'm sorry, the reason I'm hesitating is visibility is very good at that location. So in terms of the harm, again, I just have to on balance say, well, what is the harm? I appreciate drivers will sometimes look and fail to see, and there are many accidents that occur like that. Unfortunately, that's a driver's responsibility. It's not something you can physically design out. We can take reasonable steps to incorporate a design to minimise that risk, and that would be part of a reasonable and sensible package. Again, I don't see any insurmountable issues in that sense, and that would normally be done as part of the design technical approval road safety audit process by an independent auditor to come up with a final solution. So I'd like to think that if those issues were raised, they could be overcome through the normal course of the design process. So I'm not sure that necessarily requires a member direction on that particular issue.
So just going back to the obligations as they're written in the main report. So obligation 16, access improvement works, bullet point 4, that currently says, as I mentioned earlier, associated with the SANG access onto the A327 Observer Way under traffic regulation order to ban right turning movements into the access. If that were to be amended to into and out of the access, would that satisfy members? Yeah, and Alan as well. Would that work?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that is subject to the applicant agreeing that modification, but it would then not mean a condition is needed. It would just all form part of that obligation and be captured in the traffic regulation order. So we could amend the recommendation that subject to the conditions, obligations and the update to that obligation that we would approve the application. If that amendment were not agreeable to the applicant, the application would have to come back to the committee. I've just got a nod from the applicant that that is agreeable, so yeah.
Okay. So I will propose, not because I think this is a great site or it's a fantastic place. Yeah, it's just, I know if it just principle of development, it is not working here, but those have not been showstoppers in the past for the ones. Reduced settlement has not been exposed. So I reluctantly propose this one. I have a seconder, Carol, to support officer's recommendation. And with that additional update, hopefully included.
Yes, it will be subject to the applicant agreeing that in writing as well, but we have got that initial
I think
indication.
that's what takes my most prominent concern out. And reluctantly, my other concerns have been overwritten by appeals on too many occasions. So could I see a pair of hands for support of this application? Thank you. Thank you, Connie. Okay, I'll leave it. This will be the end of this. Thank you very much.